Next, let's add some details to the bush on the left. I'll make a selection from the layer. Just like I did with the grass, I'll create two new layers, one for branches texture and one for branches tint. I'll group them with the bush layer to keep things organized. I'll choose the linear size P angle B brush and the far twigs nozzle. On the branches texture layer, I'll use a large brush to paint with heavy pressure near the base of the bush and lighter pressure near the top. I'll create arching strokes while tilting my pen to make the branches fan out. I'll make a selection of the branches texture, then I'll go to the branches tint layer and set it to overlay. I'll fill with a brown color from the HSL gamut that has a hue of 93 and a saturation of 81. Next, I'll select the linear size P angle B color brush, which uses the additional color to automatically tint the grayscale nozzle. I'll select the additional color to activate it, and choose one of the saturated yellow-orange colors from the HSL gamut. I'll enable stroke attributes, and choose Screen. Then I'll paint some quick downward strokes to overlay some branches that are a different color. It's important to remember to click back on your main color after using the additional color. Otherwise, you may have trouble selecting colors since most brushes use the main color. Next, I'll choose the digital airbrush G, which can use the merge mode. I'll choose Overlay, and I'll lighten from the top of the bush downward to fade it into the brown. Follow the base colors we laid down earlier. After that, deselect the active selection and go to the bush left layer. Enable Preserve Transparency, and select the linear size P angle B brush, and with stroke attributes set to Screen, add lighter twigs to the top of the bush with a medium brush. Now set the merge mode to multiply, and add darker twigs to the base of the bush. Use a mid-tone indigo color so that it does not build up to black. Let's disable Preserve Transparency and add some frosting to the bush using the linear size P angle B brush with the stroke attributes set to Screen. I'll get a selection of the bush left layer and create a new screen layer to paint on. I'll name this layer Branches Frost and move it to the top of the bush group. Then I'll use the indigo color and build up strokes to add form to the bush and make it look like it's covered in frost. Use a small amount near the base of the bush too. We will come back to this bush and add some brighter snow colors later. I'll deselect the active selection. To cover the base of the bush, we'll need to add some grass. I'll create a new layer called Bush Grass, and I'll use the linear size P brush with the fan dabs nozzle to add some grass surrounding the base of the bush. Slant and taper the strokes to show the form and perspective of the land, and make the grass look taller by doing a few downward strokes with light pressure. I'll enable Preserve Transparency and tint directly on that layer using an indigo shadow color and the sponge set to the Color Composite method. I'll disable Preserve Transparency. Next, we will need to add some form and detail to the snowy base of the foreground trees. Keep in mind that there will eventually be some layers behind this. I'll create and hide a selection of the snow base layer and create a couple of thick paint layers above it with about 15% visible depth. On the bottom thick paint layer, I'll paint with the Broken Paint flat brush and use the distant snow colors and indigo colors to create a mound beneath the trees. On the top thick paint layer, I will add another layer of lighter snow color and some of the nearby grass color on the shadow side of the mound. Then I will merge all of the snow base layers and blend with the smooth knife blender. Next, I'll create a new layer called Mound Grass, and I'll use the linear size P brush with the fan dabs nozzle to add some grass surrounding the base of the mound. Slant and taper the strokes to show the form and perspective of the mound. I'll enable Preserve Transparency and tint directly on that layer using HSY grass colors and the sponge set to the Color Composite method. I want the bottom right side to blend into the warm grass colors, but everything else should be cool in color since the trees cast a shadow. I'll disable Preserve Transparency. I'll add one more layer called Mound Frost, and I'll set it to Screen. I'll paint with the same indigo shadow color and the linear size P brush, and it will blend to white because of the Screen Composite method. Reduce the opacity of that layer to around 44% to blend it into the mound. The lightest colors should be about equal in brightness to the distant snow. I'll group the mound layers together into a mound group. Now let's move into the background. When creating courses, I try to move through the painting in a linear and logical way, but when I am painting freely, I just work on what I feel like. Generally, it makes sense to concentrate your efforts mostly on the foreground, since what you paint in the background may be covered if you do that first. It's best to try to keep everything equal in terms of detail, so let's add some detail to the distant hills. Let's sample the base color of that layer. I'll get a selection of the layer and create a thick paint layer above it. I'll use the broken paint flat brush to paint some texture onto the hill. I'll use a purple hue angle of 5 with about 40 saturation and a value of around 115. Use light pressure to make the paint break into a texture. Check your values and it should be just a bit lighter. Next, fully desaturate that color and make it just plain gray. Painting with gray creates optical illusions that fill in missing colors. Now sample some of the foreground grass color and blend that in near the top of the hill. Rotate your flat dab to create hard angular edges in some areas. Let's add another thick paint layer and paint with the snow colors to add some snow over the hill. Use a lighter blue near the top and the darker snow color at the base of the hill. Reduce the opacity of this layer a bit to blend it so it's not as light as the snow in the foreground. This helps it look more distant. Next, merge all of the hill's BG layers together and blend only a few areas using the smooth knife blender. This hill should have fairly sharp details overall. I'll use the digital airbrush G with the indigo shadow color and the screen merge mode to lighten the top of the hill to create a spherical or domed form. Much of the base and sides will be covered by trees, so these areas can remain dark. I'll deselect the active selection. To push the distant trees behind the hills, I'll create a new screen layer above the tree line layers, and I'll use a large digital airbrush with the deepest sky color to paint along the horizon. Hold Shift to paint a straight stroke and overlap it once or twice until it looks like a bit of atmosphere between the planes. I'll name this layer Mist. Now let's add some form to the hill's low layers using the digital airbrush with Preserve Transparency enabled. I'll start with the front layer. I'll sample the lightest snow color, and with a small brush, I will hold Shift to paint a straight line across the top of the hill. Draw a freeform with an almost white to highlight the top edge and add form to any lumps. Add in some shadows on the opposite side of the lumps and around the curve. The back hills are in shadow, so I will darken the bottom using the indigo shadow color. Then I will use an almost white along the top edge with a fine brush. Next, I'll add some bushes to the horizon. I'll create a new layer called Bushes Horizon Texture, and I'll disable Preserve Transparency. I want the bottom of the bushes to be flat, so I will make a rectangular selection and hide it to mask the bottom edge. I'll use the linear size P brush and the fan dabs nozzle. Zoom in and make your brush small. Then use short downward strokes that taper from light to heavy to create natural looking bushes. This nozzle is too light, so I'll darken it using Adjust Color to subtract 30 from the value. Tinting will make it a bit darker as well. Let's tint it a different way this time. Since this is a minor layer, I don't need to worry as much about ruining it, so I won't bother making a separate layer for the tinting. I'll just use the digital airbrush G set to color directly on the layer. I'll enable Preserve Transparency and use the indigo shadow color at the base of the bushes and the warm grass color at the top. I'll disable Preserve Transparency and repeat this process for the front layer of bushes. I'll create a separate layer called Bushes Horizon Texture Front for that, and I'll adjust the selection to move it up a bit. These bushes need to be much larger since they're closer. You can even extend the bushes and the selection off to the left. Be sure to enable Preserve Transparency and tint this layer using the digital airbrush G set to color. Next, let's add some trees to the big hill in the distance. I'll group the hill's BG layer and add 3 new layers above it called Trees Dark, Trees Brown, and Trees White. These will be different types of trees. Let's start by putting in a base shadow color to paint on top of each of the 3 layers. I'll disable Preserve Transparency. I'll sample the darkest indigo color from the hill, and the brush I will use is Flat Captured. I can get a lot of different looks out of this brush. First, I can change the paper texture. Some papers look like different types of trees, and changing the scale of the paper can make the leaves or clumps of leaves larger or finer. Second, you can easily change the shape of the dab using the Captured panel in my Custom Dabs palette drawer. There are many dabs to choose from, and we can even edit the dabs with effects to randomize them, or we can quickly capture dabs directly from the canvas. To reset this brush to its default dab, it's a little tricky. You'll need to open the general brush controls with Ctrl B, then change the dab type of the brush, and hit the reset button in the properties bar. At the bottom of the list are some custom dabs that I've created. We'll be using some of these, but let's start with the default dab for this brush. I'll set the paper to simulated wood grain and scale it to around 50%. Then I'll paint in the silhouettes of the trees on the Trees White layer. Pick your brush up and that will offset the paper texture a bit. Do this until your trees are filled in. Next, I'll change my dab to Hanging Foliage. It's important to note that any effects that were applied to the dab will remain active when you switch dabs. So I'll need to lower or disable the erosion effect to see this dab. I'll just lower the erosion to around 6% and paint a tree shape for example. If I increase or decrease the erosion, I get leaves that look more or less dense. Now I can make trees that look a bit different than the previous shapes I created. I'll clear those examples, and I'll remove the erosion. On the Trees Brown layer, I will paint some trees that sort of run up the left edge of the hill and then come down to form a peak. If it is difficult to see what you are doing, temporarily hide the tree line layers, and maybe even the hill's BG layer. I'll change my dab to Wispy, and my paper to Basic Paper, and paint another style of trees at the base of the hill on the Trees Dark layer. Show any layers you may have hidden once you're done. Next, I'll enable Preserve Transparency and use a large digital airbrush with the sky color to make all of the tree shadows lighter at the base. This sets them apart from the planes in front. I'll also make the white tree shadows a bit lighter. Next, I'll go to the Tree Line Mist layer, disable Preserve Transparency, and just be sure that it extends behind the trees in front of it. And last, I'll add some mist to the bottom of the hill's BG layer. This mist is important to separate your layers from each other. Create contrast like this anytime you want to make something stand out. Now let's add some other colors to the trees so they stand out against the shadows of the hill. I'll start with the Trees White and enable Preserve Transparency. I'll reset the Flat Captured brush, and I'll sample the dark indigo and make it slightly less bright than the snow on the ground. There are several trees clumped together, so make the leaves on each tree more concentrated to the top and fade it down. Make your brush smaller to add more than one layer of leaves. I'll add in a tiny amount of the grass color so the leaves look like they have some color. Now I'll make my color even brighter and use that to highlight the tips of the white trees. This should be brighter than the sky, but darker than the snow on the ground. Next, I'll add details to the Trees Dark layer. I'll select an HSY muted purple color and choose the Wispy dab while lowering the erosion. I'll continue using the Basic Paper. I'll make my brush small. Then I'll paint some subtle details onto the trees. I want them to barely stand out and look mostly dark. We'll give the same treatment to the brown trees. I'll choose the Hanging Foliage dab and use one of the most desaturated browns from the HSY gamut and vary it a bit. I'll keep the hue shifted toward reds and magentas so it reads as brown compared to the grass, which is meant to be more yellow. Again, treat these as individual trees clumped together. You can select more saturated browns and tap in a few areas that have a bit more color. Then add a lighter brown near the tips to help those stand out. I'll disable Preserve Transparency, and let's create a new layer above the trees for some trunks. I'll use a 1-pixel smooth palette knife with the snow color to paint in some mostly vertical lines that run down the center of many of the trees. You can add visual interest by painting a few trunks that lean over. Add some trunks that are bare in a few places too. Now let's enable Preserve Transparency and use the digital airbrush to tint some of the trunks with the indigo shadow color to make them less uniform in color. Then save a copy of your work, disable Preserve Transparency, and then add a mask to the trunks layer and use black with the flat captured brush to conceal some of the trunks so they look as if they're being covered by leaves. When you are finished, apply the layer mask. Now you may want to go back to the Hills BG layer and add some more detail to separate the trees from the hills. For example, I'll add a thick paint layer, select the broken paint flat brush, and the simulated wood grain paper. Then I'll paint with the sky color beneath the trees to give the impression of snow and shadow. And using a tiny bit of warm colors will help bring the layers together as well. Just be sure they are fairly desaturated since they're far away. Don't forget to paint beneath the white trees to make them look like they're resting on a ledge. I'll use a smaller brush with a smaller paper scale and an almost white warm color from the HSI gamut. And I'll use the ground snow color to create a few more shadows against the warm. Now I'll merge that layer down with the Hills BG and use the greasy blender to blend it diagonally down toward the left on the bottom left. On the top, I'll blend horizontally. Now I'll group all of the tree layers into a group called Hill FG Trees. I'll also group the distant tree line and call it Tree Line Far. Next, we'll paint in some darker evergreen trees between the distant tree line and the hills. I'll create 2 layers, evergreens front and evergreens back. I'll use the Fan Dabs nozzle for this. Paint with the linear size P color brush with the indigo shadow color set to the additional color. Adjust the value in saturation and test it on the color testing layer to ensure that it's about the same or lighter than the deepest shadows on the hill trees. Make the width of the brush the maximum width of the base of the trees, and paint starting from the top using light pressure and increase pressure as you move downward. As you move down, move side to side so that you're creating a conical shape. Make the treetops sparse and the bottoms very full so that you cannot see through to the background. Now let's use the same brush on the evergreens back layer. These trees will be covered by some of the trees in front of them, so aside from one distinct tree, the rest will sort of fill in the background. Now let's return to the evergreens front layer and add some shading to the trees. I'll enable Preserve Transparency. Then I'll use one of the desaturated cyan colors from the HSY gamut to paint with the linear size P color brush set to 50% opacity. Build up the colors with overlapping strokes. Next, I'll shift the hue cooler and make the color lighter. Use this to make the trees look frosted. Repeat this on the background evergreens. Now that I am through with the additional color, I'll toggle back to the main color. I'll also disable Preserve Transparency. Above the tree's evergreen back layer, I will add some lighter trees on a new layer called Light Trees Back with the flat captured brush. Use similar colors and forms to the white trees on the right. Just use the shapes you already laid down on the tree line layer. Next, I'll create a new layer above the evergreens front called Light Trees Front. Just use this layer to sample and apply colors from the lighter trees so they overlap the evergreens in a few places. Let's bring this area together with a few 2-pixel trunks for some of the lighter trees using the smooth palette knife. I'll indicate a few trunks on the evergreens as well. And I can use this to put some sticks coming up from the horizon. Turn on Preserve Transparency, tint with a digital airbrush, and mask with flat captured, just like we did in the previous example. Apply the mask, and disable Preserve Transparency when you are done. I'll want to add some contrast to separate the tree layers a bit. I'll group all of the tree layers into a tree line near group. Above that group, I'll add a multiply layer and a screen layer. I'll make a selection of the tree line near group And on the multiply layer, I'll use the digital airbrush to darken the shadows of the evergreens a bit near the base. Next, I'll use the digital airbrush with a sky color to set the plane back a bit on the screen layer. Reduce the layer opacity as needed. When I'm done, I'll deselect and I'll move the mist and shadows into that group at the top. Because trees often look quite similar, you can save some time by duplicating the evergreen layers to make more of them. Select the layer adjuster, and then hold Alt and drag the trees to clone them onto a new layer. Then merge the evergreen layers, and use the eraser to prune a few branches to conceal any repeating patterns that might stand out. Coming up in the next video, we'll fill in behind the foreground trees and detail the stream and shoreline.